Today we have Peter Voser here from Shale, and he is going to speak a little bit about the energy business throughout the world. But before we turn to him, I thought I'd like to just talk a little bit about what's taking place in the country in terms of energy and all the energy that the country is currently finding. So it's really, there's really an energy revolution taking place right now. And essentially this country is really putting itself in a great competitive position to create lots and lots of jobs, lots of manufacturing jobs, as energy inputs are very competitive and low cost here in the United States. And for us, my company, Global, happens to be a master limited partnership in the midstream space of energy. What does that mean? That means we provide the logistics to move that energy to the marketplaces that consume it. And there's literally tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of capital that needs to get put to work to get this energy to the marketplace. For us, we were fortunate. We're moving lots and lots of it by rail, about a little over 100,000 barrels a day. And that system is getting built out. It's been responsive to the market. And essentially, we're trying to take that energy that companies like Shell are finding, putting them to the refineries or putting them into the consumer's hand, which ultimately will result in lower prices to the consumer. So I thought with that, so Peter's Chief Executive Officer of Royal Dutch Shell, Europe's largest energy company. He's a native of Switzerland. He is the first chief executive of the Anglo-Dutch company who is neither Dutch nor British. Shell is based in The Hague near Amsterdam and is one of the few fully integrated energy companies, meaning it handles everything along the energy value chain. It is a major energy player in North America in exploration, production, refining, in wind energy, biofuels, in research, and with the largest retail gasoline network in the country. Here in the Boston area, Shell is making plans to launch an open innovation center through which it will explore and collaborate on technology with partners outside the energy industry. Peter became Shell CEO in July 2009 after serving several years as Chief Financial Officer. He joined the company in 1982 after graduating in business administration from the University of Applied Sciences in Switzerland. From there, he held several finance and business roles in Switzerland, the United Kingdom, Argentina, and Chile. He left Shell in 2002 and served more than 2 years as CEO of the ABB Group of companies, leading a successful turnaround before returning to Shell as CEO in 2004. Peter serves on the board of directors of the Swiss healthcare company Roche and is active in several international and bilateral organizations, including the European Roundtable of Industrialists and the Business Council. Earlier this week, he was named chair of Catalyst, a global nonprofit organization that works to expand opportunities for women in business. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Peter Voser.
Thank you, Eric, and for this very warm welcome, and good afternoon to all of you here in Boston. I want to start my speech by apologizing if any of you were expecting a stereotypical oil man here. As Eric mentioned, I'm a native of Switzerland, and I live and work in Holland, which has far more windmills and wind turbines than actually oil rigs. I've spent quite a bit of time down in Texas, where we have our U.S. operations, our American subsidiary Shale Oil. But honestly, I really don't look good in a cowboy hat. I obviously haven't picked up the drawl, and I'm not particularly fond of whiskey either. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I mention these stereotypes because the issue I want to discuss today really demands that we question old assumptions. It also demands that we be realistic about where our world is heading. I want to share with you my views on the future of energy, on the impact of the American shale revolution, as mentioned by Eric, and what the world needs to do now to begin addressing one of the greatest challenges mankind has ever faced. So let me start by telling you a bit about Shale and where we stand, and maybe I can dispel a few more stereotypes. Today, Shale employs around 90,000 people in more than 70 countries in the world, including about 20,000 here in the United States. About half of our employees work every day with some of the most advanced technology in the world. In fact, last year the editors of MIT's Technology Review listed Shell as one of the world's most innovative technology companies. In our industry, I would say we are called the high-tech company. Now, we also believe climate change is real and time is running out to take real action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We support governments putting a price on carbon through such systems like cap and trade. And yes, we do see a need to develop renewables like wind and solar and biofuels. Now, we also need to make our cities more energy efficient. And we need to keep pushing the technology to make our cars and trucks consume less fuels and facilitate the use of alternative fuels like electricity, hydrogen, biofuels, and natural gas. Now, at the same time, we also need to find and extract more oil and natural gas, often in more challenging and expensive locations. Now I realize that the last line I said is what most people here in this room would expect me to say. But please hear me out first. The fact is that our global energy system is so big, our energy consumption is on a scale so massive, and demand is growing so quickly that we will need to aggressively pursue all sources of energy for decades to come, just to keep up. When your President Obama says America's energy policy should be all of the above, he is absolutely right in our opinion. Here are a few numbers and facts to keep in mind. Every day, our global population increases by more than 220,000 people. That is the equivalent of adding a city of 1.5 million people, so more than the population of Boston proper, every week. Here in the developed world, we do actually not readily see the impact of that. But the rapid growth which we have elsewhere, like in China, India, Brazil, and other developing nations, is huge. As the population rises in these countries, there are also millions more people each year moving up from poverty into joining the middle class. Now, this increasing prosperity has been a fantastic human achievement resulting from the globalization of our economy. But it also raises some global issues that promise to become more challenging for all of us to address in the years ahead. Most of these people are flocking to rapidly growing cities where they are using more energy as they use their first appliances and drive their first cars. As a result, in the next 7 years alone, the world's additional energy demand could be equal in size to China's entire energy system today. So only 7 years to build that. Now this creates what we call a prosperity paradox. That is when the ongoing rise in prosperity, combined with a rapidly growing population, creates stresses that over time threaten to undermine that prosperity. These stresses are building on all of our vital systems and our environment. The United Nations estimates that by 2030, the world will need 30% more water, 40% more energy, and 50% more food to keep up with the increased demand. And that's not far off. As you know, a baby born today will graduate high school in 2030. The challenge of addressing these resource needs is magnified many times by the linkages between them. Water is needed for all forms of energy production. Energy is needed to treat and transport water, and both water and energy are needed to grow food. And the potential effects of climate change will influence the three. So to successfully address these challenges, governments, business, and society at large needs to address them intelligently and actually together. At Shell, we spend a considerable amount of time analyzing these kinds of trends so we can get a better handle on the future and make better decisions. It is critically, really, because unlike most other businesses, our investment decisions can take 10, 20, or even 30 years to pay off. For the past 40 years, our scenarios team has had the mandate to look towards the future with an independent, unbiased eye. Now, the future is neither completely predictable nor completely random. The scenarios can at least give us a tool to anticipate what might happen and allow us to understand our options. So, in other words, they deepen our strategic thinking. And actually, at Shell, we share this strategic thinking with governments, researchers, academia, and the public. In our latest report, the scenario team analyzes how economic, social, and political forces might play out through this century and how those forces affect the evolution of our global energy system. At your tables, you will actually find the latest copy of these scenarios, which we actually launched in Washington some 10 days ago. They're called the New Lens Scenarios. It goes into far more depth on each of the two scenarios than I can here explain, so I encourage you to take it home and dig into it. It's a fascinating reading. Let me just give you a few highlights from the report. By 2035, both scenarios anticipate the world's energy renewables sources growing by at least 60%, 60, or even double. Yet in each scenario, fossil fuels are still likely to meet about 60% of the global energy demand by 2060. That's because, as I noted earlier, the demand is expected to grow so sharply over the next 50 years. And the 60% figure, which I quote for 2060, is still down significantly from today, because today we are roughly at 80%. One of our scenarios foresees a world strongly shaped by market forces, in which oil, gas, and coal continue to play a major role, as do renewables post-2030. But in this scenario, action to address climate change comes slowly. As a result, coal use continues to rise for decades, with a resulting rise in CO2 emissions. In another scenario, the world is strongly influenced by government policies and the abundance of natural gas. Gas becomes the most important energy source globally by 2030. This is combined with a coordinated global effort to limit CO2 emissions, such as government support for carbon capture and storage technologies. Again, let me stress the point that these scenarios are not predictions. The direction we take will depend largely on decisions being made now and through the coming decade. And as you may have guessed, there is no silver bullet here. Now let me talk about the American shale revolution in that context. So fortunately, we are seeing some very positive news on the energy front in the recent years. News that the potential to help ease the transition to a more sustainable energy system. Here in North America, the energy outlook is much different from what it was just a few years ago as a result of the American shale revolution. This, combined with the increased oil production in the Gulf of Mexico, the potential of major deposits in the Arctic, and the growth in tight oil and heavy oil, including the oil sands, North America's energy picture is much brighter. Improvements in technology known as hydraulic fracturing are unlocking huge volumes of oil and gas. And this technology has the potential to do so in the same way elsewhere around the world as well. Now, the United States has led the world in developing these technologies and is already reaping the benefits of its deployments, as we heard at the beginning from Eric, in terms of greater energy security, economic growth, and job growth. And job growth not in the energy industry, but in the manufacturing industry. As recently as 2008, North America was facing the end of its natural gas self-sufficiency. Prices soared, as you may all remember, and plans were made to build import terminals for liquefied natural gas, what we call LNG. Today, those plans have been mothballed, prices are down by 2/3, and there is discussion of LNG export. As a low-priced fuel and the chemicals feedstock, natural gas and gas liquids have the potential to revitalize America's heavy industry and open up new markets in transportation, for example. Now, there is talk of the United States becoming self-sufficient in energy by 2030. As production of American shale oil increases, traditional oil supplies to the United States are diverting cargoes to new markets. And because utilities have been switching to natural gas from coal to generate electricity, CO2 emissions are down significantly. In fact, according to the US Energy Information Agency, natural gas has displaced nearly 10% of the coal used to generate electricity in the US over the past 2 years. Now you can ask yourself, where is the coal going? It goes to Europe. There is a certain irony here. Cheap US coal is replacing cleaner burning natural gas in Europe. Now, coal, of course, produces far more CO2 than natural gas. So despite a major, very costly push to subsidize and develop renewables in Europe's CO2 emissions were actually up last year, while here in America it was actually down. So which I think is another proof that government policies, or the lack of it, sometimes have unintended effects. So in Europe there has been far less enthusiasm among policymakers for natural gas, which to me does not make sense, because gas is the natural ally of renewables like wind and solar. The fear among some is abundant natural gas will hinder the advance of renewables. But gas has actually a very strong role to play as a backbone fuel as the renewable industry actually develops. Wind and solar are intermittent energy sources. Now, natural gas can keep the electricity flowing when the sun doesn't shine and the wind fails to blow. Unlike many other energy sources, gas can be switched off and on quickly, and its global supply is now increasingly diverse, which enhances energy security. So Europe is finding out that getting the energy mix right is crucial. If you invest in renewables to lower greenhouse gas emissions, but then switch from natural gas to coal to make up the difference, have you really improved anything? Would be my question. Now, much of Europe is also believed to hold a lot of shale resources, but some countries have been reluctant to explore for them. And with no strong government policy direction in favor of natural gas and shale gas, utilities have been reluctant to invest in gas plants. For example, France has even banned hydraulic fracturing due to environmental concerns. Now, the reality is hydraulic fracturing has been performed more than 1 million times over the past 6 decades in the United States alone. Documented instances of freshwater contamination have been extremely rare. I would like to say that when a well is designed and constructed correctly, groundwater will actually not be contaminated. Now, having said that, our industry needs to work with governments to do a better job of addressing these concerns. Strong regulations and tough enforcements are needed to ensure all operators drill shale gas or shale wells properly and protect groundwater and the environment. Now, shale development must be done in a demonstrably responsible way to gain public support. At Shell, we also support regulations to disclose chemicals used in hydraulic fracturing fluids and to promote transparency and public engagements by the shale gas industry in relation to all its activities. Here in the United States, we already publicly disclose our fracturing fluid chemicals through the Frac Focus online registry, to the extent allowed, I have to say, under our supplier contracts, because still some do not allow us to do so. As I said, the shale revolution does have the potential to go global. Some reports suggest China may have considerably more shale gas than the United States. Some estimate it to be 50% higher than here. Now, exploration is underway there to determine the potential. China, like the United States, has an abundance of coal, but is also looking for cleaner alternatives as it deals with its rapid growth and increasing pollution. But the growth of shale resources globally is by no means certain. Technologies, skills, policies needed for this revolution to take hold outside North America will need to be transferred and developed. So what are the geopolitical implications of the American shale boom? The abundance of natural gas and affordable prices are already giving the American chemicals industry and then energy-intensive manufacturing a global competitive advantage. So you have a cheap feedstock for these industries. Countries and regions that fail to adopt a strategy to utilize their own shale gas resources could find their manufacturing industries on the losing end in the rest of the world. On the oil side, the situation is a little bit more complicated. The same technology that has led to the gas boom is being used to free up oil trapped in shale as well. As a result, the United States will likely import far less oil from the Middle East over the next 2 decades. But most analysts, and we would be of the same opinion, expect the United States will still need to import. And it will still have an interest in ensuring global energy security. One reason is there is a limited refining capacity in the US for light oil. This means some oil will need to be exported and other crudes will continue to be imported to accommodate the refining infrastructure we have in this country. Overcoming this imbalance will take time and considerable investments. But there are also some practical and strategic reasons why the US should remain engaged in the region. The European Union and Japan are key political allies who will continue to be highly dependent on Middle Eastern oil. China is expected to become more dependent as well over time. Because the oil market is global, any major disruption in the flow of oil in any region would affect the global and the US economies. So it is hard to see a scenario in which the US abandons its interest in the Middle East. Obviously, there was a big speech today in Israel as well on this, so I think it is recognized. There is no doubt the shale revolution has been good for North America and its economic recovery, and that it has altered the region's energy picture so favorably. But the American shale revolution alone will not get us on the road to a cleaner and more sustainable global energy system. So, in summary, what needs to be done? First, the world needs to follow Americans' lead and take full advantage of the cleanest burning fossil fuel, and that's natural gas. The International Energy Agency estimates that there is enough technically available natural gas globally to last 250 years at today's consumption levels. Increased use of natural gas is the biggest single step the world can take today to begin reducing CO2 emissions. In generating power, natural gas produces about half the CO2 emissions of coal. As I said earlier, gas is the natural ally of renewables, and its supply is increasingly diverse, which enhances energy security. Second, governments must support development of carbon capture and storage technologies to make fossil fuels use cleaner. This is critical to take CO2 out of the power sector over the next 50 years. It can help meet the demand for cleaner energy at a time when renewables are still being deployed on a relatively small scale. But the technology remains at an early stage of its development. It needs major financial support and strong mandates around the world to get it off the ground. Finally, and the third one, all governments need to promote more effective, efficient urban planning and transportation. There is a tremendous opportunity for good planning to moderate the growth in energy demand, especially in the swelling cities of China, India, and other high-growth cities, but also, for example, in the United States. Houston needs 3 times more energy than a normal average European cities just because the way it is built. It's simply really cities with higher population density are more energy efficient than sprawling cities. They encourage people to use public transport and drive less. Widespread development of more compact cities offers savings of an average of 2,000 kilometers per person annually in car usage, compared with the low-density development common in many parts of the world today. Intelligent urban planning could transform the global transport system over the next 50 years by providing the infrastructure for cars and trucks powered by electricity, hydrogen, and also natural gas. The increasing use of liquefied natural gas in trucking and marine transportation here in North America is an excellent example of how this can actually be built. Substantial efficiency gains should be targeted in other areas as well. This includes retrofitting homes and commercial buildings, optimizing energy use in the heavy and petrochemicals industries, and redesigning our transportation systems. But for these things to happen, we will need far-sighted government policies and far more collaboration between governments and businesses, because I don't think I need to tell you that if you look at the last few years, that actually didn't work. certainly not in the West. We were working against each other rather than together. And I get this question quite a bit from Western politicians. So give me an example where it does work. And they never like my answer because I say normally China has been perhaps the most pragmatic and far-sighted in setting energy policies to prepare for a future in which demand will soar. China has actually set very clear goals with a view towards ensuring a cleaner, more diverse and sustainable energy system, and is promoting the investments, the huge investments into that, which we also need in the Western world. So we know the scale of the challenge ahead of us. We know it will require a global, coordinated and intelligent response. The time is to act now and not lose time. And with that, thank you very much for listening, and I'm open for questions.
If everybody could just wait for a mic to come around if they have a question.
No cowboy questions. So.
I'll give you a cowboy question.
Okay.
So what's your prediction on the price of oil?
I always say between 0 and 150, so it's somewhere there. No? I think you can have different views on this, but I think one of the lenses you can look through is actually what some of the key producers need to balance their budgets long term. And if you go to the Middle East, most countries are now in the range of 100 or 100 plus. If you look at some other more technically difficult resources which we need to develop in the longer term, you're most probably also in the 90 to 100 area. Now, there will always be regional pockets where you can produce cheaper, but we still think, and I still think, it will be a global market which will have some very small regional differentiations, but they normally don't last forever. They will be kind of worked away again. So I think today, I always say at $100 oil price, I guess everything will be built.
Good afternoon, sir. William J. Walsh. I just wanted to say thank you. Welcome to the hub of the universe.
Okay.
We're proud to have you here, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for welcoming him. I just wanted to ask you, it sounds like you have the all of the above approach, essentially, to energy strategy going forward. And what would be the position of Royal Dutch Shell on the Keystone pipeline?
It's an interesting subject. I have to confess that we are an oil sand producer, and we have bought big kit sitting in at the Gulf Coast. Kit means refineries. I think I approach it from the side that energy security is a key goal for the government to achieve. Major and significant improvements in the environmental performance of oil sands have taken place. And looking at the consumption of the years to come and the energy security system, Keystone should be built, should actually come, so that North America, including Mexico, can actually build the energy hub which these vibrant economies here actually need. So I would be disappointed if it's not going to be approved.
Good afternoon. Charlotte Kahn from the Boston Indicators Project at the Boston Foundation. Sir, you spoke about the possibility of water contamination, but said that we're going to need 30% with hydraulic fracturing, but you said that we're going to need 30% more fresh water by, I believe, 2035. And hydraulic fracturing does require millions of gallons of fresh water for simply processing. How are you thinking about that equation?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. The 30% more water was the entire energy system, but indeed hydraulic fracturing, like many other energy forms, do need a lot of water. I think that's where technology and innovation comes into it. I think we need to drive the water usage in hydraulic fracturing to acceptable levels and place them in an overall water management system in a region, in a town, wherever it is. I give you some examples of what we are doing on this one to make sure that we don't build further constraints into the system. For example, in Canada, we are building a water treating system. So we are using sewage water, actually clean it, not to a drinkable level, but to a level which is actually acceptable to be used in the hydraulic fracturing, so that we don't actually take groundwater or drinking water again. That's one form of overcoming that. And it actually helps the city there as well, because we don't need everything. The rest can be used for watering sports facilities, golf courses, and et cetera, parks. That's one. Second one, on the innovation side, we are working, and I would say with good, encouraging results so far, to work towards waterless fracking, which is the next stage of hydraulic fracturing in that sense. And I think that's where collaborations like we have at Shale with MIT, where we actually bring other industries into this field of energy to search for the right solutions in the longer term, can make really a difference. So that would be a second one which we are working on, and there are a few more. So the issue is recognized. We need solutions for it, but I have never seen a problem in front of technology innovation people which cannot be solved. So I'm rather positive on that, and I see the results which we're having. But it needs us to work together, which is society, governments, and businesses, to tackle these issues. And I'm convinced we will get there. But it needs also clear regulations. We have taken the unusual step 18 months ago, that as the first company, we published our operating guidelines and standards to do hydraulic fracturing. So we just put it on the web and we gave it to regulators and asked them actually to take this into account when they set the right regulations and the right monitoring systems. So if we all work together, we can improve that. And there are some good examples on how we're driving that. I'm also, that's the last part of the answer, I'm also working together with some other 7, 8 industries, from the food industry to the power industry, to the agriculture industry, the fertilizer industries, and we are running some pilot projects across the world to look at the chain coming from energy with a lot of water usage, but also a lot of water which we still have at the end. What can we do with that in the food industry, in the fertilizer industry, etc.? So whilst in the past we all worked vertically in our industries, looking forward, some of these challenges can only be done if you look actually across the industry boundaries to optimize. So the collaboration needs to change and needs to be different. Now that's not easy, I can tell you. You need to have a very long-term view, and unfortunately the financial market drives some short-termism into our views from time to time. There's one at the back there.
Chuck Coppola with American Power Group. I just had a question. I've been reading a lot lately about exploration and production companies looking at the use of natural gas as a primary fuel or as a supplemental fuel to diesel in operating their rigs. I was wondering what Shell's viewpoint is on that.
Yeah, we're doing a few things on the gas side. The one you are alluding to is on the rigs, and I will go back to the shale gas again. Whilst normal fracking you do today by using kind of 7 diesel engines, which produce a lot of noise but also considerable CO2, we are running a few now where we, instead of the 7 engines, we use 2 helicopter turbines driven by gas, which noise level is much down, CO2 is much down, etc. So we are driving the gas into our usage on the rigs. We are doing the same on the marine side, for example. Last Friday, my wife actually christened the first fully powered LNG ship in the world. So that's using only liquefied natural gas as a power source. It's a barge which goes up and down the Rhine in Europe. So another step into using gas in a different way. We have 3 big projects in the United States and in Canada for moving LNG into the trucking business. So actually changing from diesel engines to gas engines and using the gas for powering the trucks. The same in the Great Lakes area, for example, for shipping. So we are driving that forward. We're also, all of our supply boats which we use in the Gulf of Mexico to go to our platforms over time, they will all be using gas rather than diesel or fuel oil. Our trucks which we are using in the oil sands operations, these are big Caterpillar trucks, they consume quite a bit of fuel. We are also now looking into the next engine generation to use gas for that. So that's what I mean, what you can really do and bring the energy consumption down, bring energy efficiency in. And we start with our operations first and then apply it and later on also into the market. Just a few examples.
Sir, conspicuously absent from the discussion has been any touch on nuclear fuel. What is Shell's assessment of that in the future energy picture?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. If you look at the scenario book, in both scenarios which we are outlining there, nuclear will still have its global market share. It depends a little bit how government policies will work, but it could be anything up to 10-12% of the energy mix on a global basis could still be nuclear. It's predominantly outside Europe. In emerging countries you will still see it, and it's all based on the fact that further technology improvements will be made over the next few decades. So it plays a role, but it will play, the growth in nuclear will be much slower than 5 years ago was anticipated, but still part of the energy mix. Okay. Okay. We had no hand in the sequestration, so I have to say that. So, what we have done more and more over the last few years, we actually make our independent scenario teams available to actually look at certain countries. So we have been working with the Chinese government for the last 2 years to develop energy scenarios and policies for the next 50 years in order to see what they need. We do the same. We do the same with India now. We are about to go ahead and do it in South Africa and Brazil as well. So we use the skills which we have to help countries to develop energy policies. But part of that, obviously, then is also cost and budgets and all of that, but it's not an entire government budget at the end. We also, what we do is we make the scenarios available on a global basis, and we have a great demand, and we actually, our teams travel around the world and see central bankers, see governments, budget officers, just to tell them how we see the world through the energy lens developing. So I think we make it really available, but we try to make it available and not take all the liabilities which come with it. So referring to national budgets, etc. Now you said the first one is actually quite interesting. The first one was done in the very early 70s, that's true. And I read this in our books. The first scenario team came up and said to the Shell management, you need to be very careful, because one of the scenarios we're looking at, there could be an oil price war, there could be a major recession, and therefore a major change in the oil supply in the world. That was done in April, And in October, we had the big oil price crash, rise, the oil price crisis with a recession coming. So I have to say, what I learned out of scenarios, I read them carefully, and I try just to see where my strategy could be challenged, and that is actually a great learning for us. So. Here, then go here. So. I could give you plenty of examples where taxis run on what we call CNG. So it's not the LNG, because that's more for the bigger trucks. But if you go to cities in like Buenos Aires in Argentina, you go to Pakistan, etc., they run on that. What it needs is you need a network of filling stations. You need gas available, which is now the case in the US, because if you need to import for that, you don't want that. And then you need to change in your car fleet. Now, this all needs one thing. Apart from planning and doing it, it needs money. And that, I think, we started with the trucking and the marine business here, because that's where we see the investment incentive, kind of helped by some regulations on the marine side, is really there to actually change, and we can then make that happen. That's more difficult when you go into the passenger car, but you put your finger on the right thing, like taxis, like buses. There will be nothing standing in the way to do that. But you need to have a network of filling stations. For our project, which we built between Edmonton and Vancouver, for LNG in trucks, we need to build 50 trucking filling stations, or equipped filling stations, current ones with the mini LNG, in order to actually make it viable, because these trucks need filling stations everywhere. So we start with these type of corridors to develop it now. When you go into the passenger car, then you are most probably in the 50, 60,000 station type of investments. So you have to refit them, and that's expensive. But no technical problem standing in between. So.
One last
yeah,
question.
I think he had his hand over. Yeah. Okay.
Standardized pricing at the pump seems to imply a lack of competition. I wonder if you could clarify that.
Okay. I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but in general, pricing is done as a market pricing, and it differs to the either local, regional, or country market circumstances, and that has a lot of components in it. So it is the fuel price, it is the distribution, it's the terminals, depending on where you are, the pipeline costs, etc. So there you have great varieties, and I'm not aware, I don't know exactly how it works in the States, but as a Shell philosophy, we have market pricing, which we as a company, we just offer our products at certain prices, and then the dealer or the distributor obviously has to add its own costs, and that gives you a pricing structure. Standardized pricing structures normally, in my opinion, don't work, because the service to the customer does reduce, and the customer does not pay for the customer value proposition, because it's not just filling up your car. You normally have other services in the filling stations, etc., and that needs to be factored in into your pricing structure. But he runs a few of them, so he may have an answer as well. So,
Peter, thank you very much.